Guruve Gaura Chanjaya Radhikaya Tadale Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tad Bhaktaya Namo Namaha Vancha Kalpatrubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhayevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Shri Gaura Bhaktavinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Dhanavad Pranam devotees. So for all of those who didn't get a chance yesterday to wish Happy Nrsimha Chaturdasi, very wonderful celebrations yesterday, very sweet Hari Katha. My Guru Bhai Shriman Prem Prayojan Prabhu was here in Alachua and obviously had very nice Hari Katha, very nice association. Then I had to rush back from the Hari Katha there to participate in our nightly phone conference, which was also very wonderful, nice discussions about Shri Nrsimha Dev and Shri Bhakta Prahalad. Also today is a very auspicious day. It is the appearance day, I believe, of Shri Madhavinda Puripad. Also Shri Srinivasa Acharya, disappearance day of Parameshwari Thakur. And of course it is the also appearance day of Shri Shri Radha Ramanju. So very auspicious period here and very wonderful time to be in the association of devotees discussing all of these things. Haribol Sadhanat Siddha Prabhu, Prem Prabhu, excuse me, Prem Didi. So I wanted to talk a little bit this morning because I had a conversation. This wasn't really about questions and answers, and as I mentioned yesterday, I'm still catching up on those things and I will do them. But this morning I had a discussion with another of my sort of god uncles, so to speak, Shriman Bhumipati Prabhu. Was not only a very dear friend, but like a mentor for me in so many ways. And we were just discussing, as we normally do on a day-to-day basis, as well as other godbrothers of mine whom I discuss with and speak with regularly. And sometimes we just also speak from a Krishna conscious perspective about some of the things that are going on in the world, because this is, as I've mentioned many times, the sort of a period of acceleration of Kali Yuga. And anytime that you see the news reports or anything, you can obviously see from the nature of the activities there that the things which are written in Sastra, not only in Vaishnava literature, but in any kind of biblical prophecies or Quranic prophecies or anything, you'll see that the nature of the degradation that's going on and the wanton violence and so many other things, which are all byproducts of the thickening of Kali Yuga, or just seems to be accelerating. So we've always spoken that the greatest insulation, protection, and consciousness protection especially is the avesh or absorption in bhakti. So in order to get people even into the space where there is an alternative absorption of consciousness besides what's forced on people through all of the external sensory contacts, predominantly the eyes and ears, but through everything, through the food, through the water, everything has some influence of this acceleration of Kali. So the best insulation and protection is always absorption in bhakti, and the best way to do that for people who are especially coming into the process of bhakti is by giving them the opportunity through the writings of our Guru Vargas. Means all the way back from the teachings of Sriman Mahaprabhu, what was given to Sri Sanatana Goswami Pad, manifested as Sri Brihad Bhagavatamrita, what was given to Sri Rupa Goswami Pad, manifested as so many literatures, from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu to all kinds of writings, especially in regard to Rasa Tattva. And then, of course, the Jiva Goswami Pad, Satsandarbhas, Gopal Champu, just unlimited writings. And it just continues. And even to this present day, our Guru Vargas are continuing to expand the intensity and the clarifications on the teachings of Sriman Mahaprabhu, which is the deliverance of the process of bhakti to the world at large. I've spoken of the prophecy of Sriman Mahaprabhu, so I mentioned many times this prophecy was not simply a prophecy of the manifestation of the letters of Hare Krishna. It's called Akshar, letters in Sanskrit. It's not simply a manifestation in different places. People will be singing Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, but that the cosmology, theology, teachings would not only be manifest in those places, but there'll be deep practitioners of the process of bhakti. So in that regard, especially in our experience, our Srila Prabhupada and my also Guru Parapadma, Nityalila Praveshno Vishnu Para Paramangsa Stotara Sisiman, Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj, as well as other contemporary Acharyas, continued the emphasis on the distribution of books. And through various, periods of times, emphasis, de-emphasis, slacking, enthusiastic activity in regards to book distribution has come about. And this is for a number of reasons, and I'm not getting into all these reasons. I want to keep this short as possible. But the thrust of the desire to have books distributed has been universal among all of our Guru Varga. Even if you go back to all the books that were written by our Goswami Varga, then Shyamananda Srinivas and Narottam, they were the first, so to speak, within the era of Mahaprabhu, sort of distribution party, because they took all of these books that were written in Vrindavan primarily and took them back to Bengal for dissemination so devotees could see the fruit of what it manifests by the empowerment of Sriman Mahaprabhu in the Goswami Varga, right? Means Rup, Sanat, etc., right? So book distribution has always been important. It's not become recently important because of either the traveling and preaching of our Srila Prabhupada around the world, but it has always been important. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur also gave great emphasis. Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur was one of the, in our Guru Varga, who wrote books in English and had them disseminated to the Western world. So Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur gave great emphasis to the Brihad Mridanga, means the printing press and distribution of books and literature. So my point here is that not only was there an emphasis on book distribution, but why? And I remember, I think it was back in 1975 or something, I was going out in Los Angeles and I was distributing, Back to Godhead magazines and so forth and so on in small books. And I remember I had a fancy for meeting people, and once I'd given them a book to engage them in conversation and, have a whole thing. And while I was doing that, one devotee approached me and said, Prabhuji, it's better if you can try to not spend so long talking to so many people and try to get as many books out as possible. So at the time, my frame of mind was, well, I don't understand. I mean, the whole objective is to meet people, to contact people, to encourage them to come to the temple and to come to the Sunday feast and so forth, so on. So he quoted a saying of our Srila Prabhupada, which, I've never vetted or verified, but it seems to make sense. I've not seen it literally, but I'm repeating it here because it seems to have been something that was obviously fruitful from the intention that I'll describe as we go on. He said that Srila Prabhupada said, what will your 5 minutes of preaching do? It is better that you distribute books. So, of course, this was in the context of the general missionary activities of going out with the purpose of distributing books. So, I didn't fully digest it then, but later on when I went to open temples in Africa and I saw the effect and the power of the distribution of books, I can't say just then, but even prior to that, myself and another devotee, we started to distribute sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. So we would go house to house and we would distribute sets of Srimad Bhagavatam. And even then, I was always thinking, wow, these people will now have a whole library of spiritual content that they may not access on that day, the next month, next year. But, sort of in, over the long course of time, themselves or someone else will benefit. And of course, there's a natural benefit of agyapta sukriti, if nothing else, means, unknown pious bhakti credits just by having, touching, seeing the Grantha Srimad Bhagavatam, this book Srimad Bhagavatam. So when I went to Africa to open temples and so forth, it was a huge part of the initiative to open the temple. Even when we were just, 2-3 people in the beginning, we were going out and we were distributing books, and that led to so many people coming. And in Africa, we did not, like we would go, I'm just giving an example, we would do kirtan, we would give very, very short speaking, and that was to basically gather a crowd, which, of course, in African culture, people take an interest in something, they make a crowd, they listen, so forth, so on. You don't have, though you had the same sense of industry and business and all of that, right? Just culturally, things are a little different. Whereas you may not get that same phenomenon in the Western world, right? In Africa, places where there's, I don't know, cultures of antiquity, I'll call it. You get more of that kind of sense in the social fabric where people will, even in a busy schedule, stop and listen if it's something they think they have an interest in. So we would get a small crowd, and then a bigger crowd, then a bigger crowd. And then when we got a bigger crowd, we would say, we have these books, and in these books, all the things that I've spoken about here in brief or fully explained in these books, and we'll answer many of your life's questions. Just the usual kind of things like that. And of course, then immediately, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 boxes of Science of Self-Realization would kind of just go very quickly. And we would stay to talk to people afterwards, but we always made sure we distributed these books. And sure enough, at the next Sunday feast, the attendance would be double, literally. You have the double amount of people coming to do further investigation. So I saw firsthand there the efficacy of people getting a book, having the chance to go home, digest it, not only with themselves, but sharing it with others, and how that produced an actual flow of bodies, right? Because their consciousness had been touched, obviously, by the subtle fact of Bhakti Unmukhi Sukriti, but also because they made further endeavor, their Sukriti file, their pious activities in relation to Bhakti were further expanded because they read the book or shared the book, and they would actually come to the temple. And then that gave facility for deeper explanations and so forth and so on. So my point here is that Srila Prabhupada, especially because I'm looking at the nature of the emphasis on book distribution as a worldwide phenomenon that took place under Srila Prabhupada, right, gave so much emphasis to this because it was the mechanism by which the hand of Mahaprabhu could reach into so many different arenas, so many different small portals of social existence that we could not reach, right? You may meet a few people on the street and distribute books, but the outreach of that book beyond where you may have been that day, that time, to that person who shared it with another person who saw it in their house, etc., etc. When you did that, when you multiplied that on a very wide scale, then that was a very amazing, empowered, as Srila Prabhupada used to often quote, Krishna Shakti Vina Nahi Tava Paratan. Unless one is specifically empowered, they cannot preach like this. You understand? So Srila Prabhupada, through his emphasis and inspiration, got so many millions of books, literally, to go out and seep into the small, areas of every aspect of society, pretty much. And therefore you had this myriad of people come and join the Krishna conscious movement from all kinds of backgrounds, social strata, race, creed, cultural background, etc., etc., and find commonality in the highest kind of philosophical pursuit. So this is a very, very amazing thing. It's something that's unprecedented, literally. So, of course, Srila Prabhupada also gave great emphasis not only to distributing the books, but to our own reading of the book. So in this way, it was like a double-edged sword, that you had the ability to go out and cut through the jungles. In our Srila Prabhupada's Pranam mantra, it's written there, Nirvasesha Sunyavari Paschatya Desha Tarine. That in Paschatya Desh means the Western world, Nirvisheshan Sunyavad would be destroyed by these emphasis. And especially as I started to study more and just get a deeper insight into, Gaudiya philosophy, as well as, philosophies which surround Gaudiya philosophy in India, I began to think at one point, I don't see many very serious Mayavadis in the Western world, because real serious Mayavad and teachings is very deep. People who are Sanskrit scholars and very adept. So you weren't experiencing that really in your regular environment here in America. So what was Srila Prabhupada's real meaning of Nirvisesha Sunyavad? Well, Nirvisesha Sunyavad are not only, kind of philosophical postures, but they're influences of consciousness. In other words, impersonalism can only come about when there's an obfuscation, or relativizing, or an absence of knowledge of the personality of God. This is what gives rise to the idea in spiritual circles of Mayavad or Sunyavad, right? Voidism. So really, Srila Prabhupada's emphasis in the greater world, so to speak, was not the defeat of the depth of the philosophical content of Mayavad philosophy. It also did that, but it was a change of the voidist, impersonalist consciousness that comes about from the absence of understanding the personality of God. And that was permeated everywhere in the world, right? Because for years and years, the material agenda has always been to relativize God, to emphasize sense gratification, and to emphasize sense gratification to a point where those who control the reins of sense gratification can feel themselves to be replacements actually for God. And that's obviously what we see now, is that the wealth, power, and influence in the world seeks to actually usurp the power and position of God and place themselves as the facilitators of material sense gratification. And that's narrowing down to, it's not just a matter of sense gratification, but just need, right? To be able to get the basic needs of life, you'll become dependent on these people of wealth, influence, and power who are socially engineering the social fabric. So I don't want to go down that rabbit hole. I've spoken about it before. But the nature of the movement of distribution of transcendental literature had so much power that it freed people from the misconceptions of Mayavad, Sunyavad, right? And brought them back into the realization of an absolute personality of God. The supreme personality of Godhead. Right? Because as soon as you acknowledge a person, you have to acknowledge relation. So when there's a supreme personality of Godhead, it brings out naturally, okay, what's my relationship with that personality of Godhead? We're not speaking esoteric things here or very deep theological things here, like what is your Rasa and all these. We're speaking about the nature of being the servants of God, but understanding God to be a person. You understand? So this was a very big thing. And if it had not been for this mass emphasis on the distribution of the writings of our Guru Vargas, which are spotlessly pure, right? Because it's Al Srila Prabhupada, all of his translations, his Bhavanubhag means his purports, all of these things contain not only the information content, but the spiritual potency to affect consciousness. If it didn't, you wouldn't see that, literally millions of people came and became involved in the Krishna conscious movement in some way, form, or fashion, either very seriously, on the periphery, however, they became involved somehow or another in the mission and movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu by this emphasis on book distribution, right? Now, more than ever, it's very important because the nature of how information is disseminated has grown exponentially. Now we're living in, or we have been living in for a long time, what's called the information age, right? Where there's so much flow of information that it overwhelms the so-called human database, right? Because our human facility is meant to accumulate knowledge. We should be digesting that knowledge, and it should be coming through critical thinking filters, etc., etc. But really now there's such a flow of information, nobody can keep up with it in terms of processing it, critically thinking about it, then digesting it, then applying it. That process is pretty much overwhelmed by the flow of information, just as much as, if you go out into the ocean and you get to a certain point of progress into the ocean water, when the waves come, you're just overwhelmed, right? It's not like when you're standing on the shore and the breaking waves run across your feet or something, right? I always tell a very funny story. I was preaching in Africa, And I would sometimes go from Ghana back to Nigeria to pick up books or supplies or something like that, something that we may have needed, right? But most of them were predominantly books, right? Because a lot of books were based in Nigeria at that time. And I remember stopping in one small country called Togo when I was on my way to Ghana to first open the temple there with Pujapat Shanta Maharaj, who was Madhav Prabhu back that time, and some other devotees. At that time, we passed this place. And I remember mentioning to the devotees how beautiful it was, etc., etc. It was right on the ocean, so forth and so on. And that particular town is called Lomé in Togo. So once coming back, I was traveling alone. I decided to stay overnight and then to, see the sunrise, chant, and all these things, and then to go in the ocean there, right? So, of course, I got up that morning, chanted my rounds. I watched the sun come up, chanted Onyx, so it just felt very blissful and everything. And then I went to go in the ocean. So I had my gumshoe, everything was going, and I noticed that nobody was swimming. So I thought, well, it's a weekday probably, and people are busy, they're working, it's just not a thing. And it wasn't really like, I had never seen from the time that I had passed through Lomé before, people really looking at that particular section of the beach as a recreational section. I always saw people selling stuff. I saw the fishing boats, all of that, but I never saw anybody really, like beach activity there. But anyway, I just thought that's just a phenomenon here. I didn't know. So long story short, I went out and I went to go swimming. And I always tell how funny it was because I saw some ladies, market ladies, they were waving at me. And I just thought they were saying good morning, so I waved back, right? Anyway, to get to the point, come to find out, I run out and dive into the water. I'm a fairly good swimmer. So I dive into the water and it has riptides. So now I'm having a hard time standing up. I'm being dragged on the bottom and scraped and this and that. Finally, by grace of Guru and Krishna, I'm able to make my way back to the shore. And of course, out of utter embarrassment, I just nod my head, I'm okay, etc., etc. But what that made me realize was that this is comparable to how people are being overcome by information. It seems very innocent. It seems actually very even pleasing to turn on social media, regular TV media, or entertainment media, so forth, so on. And these things are filled with the both gross and subtle elements of Kali Yuga. And so they're just, like those waves, almost like a riptide. It's not only overwhelming people, but a riptide, it's dragging people under and submerging them. And the only life raft in that situation is to throw them a book, for lack of a better word. Because this gives them a chance to have the ability, because even when you speak to people, just like those ladies were speaking to me, they were trying to give me a warning, don't go in there. But it's not until you kind of, have contact literally with something that you can take some time to digest and so forth and so on, that you can actually have a change of heart. So that experience gave me a change of heart about being cautious about, going to places you don't really know everything about that place, and just looking, in the spirit of even mode of goodness, enjoyment, right? To just be careful. So if we are able to distribute more and more books, or we have these mediums like what I'm doing now, and many devotees are doing these sort of things, to be able to reach out to more and more people via this medium, and still very much so books, right? Is the only way that people will get a chance to get the life raft that allows them, because obviously if you're in water, especially if it's deep water, you'll need to use your energy to either maintain yourself afloat or have a device that can allow you to float. So these books are like that. They allow people to at least float. Once they begin to digest a little bit, they can float enough to reinsert in their own lives critical thinking, some idea of, wait a minute, all this material stuff, something's not right here, right? And then hopefully and gradually go deeper and get a real change of consciousness, right? And perhaps then come into somehow or another the purview of a sadhu to really develop shraddha, and then to take up the practice, which is the actual lifeboat, so to speak, of getting out and getting out of the material world, or transversing this ocean of material existence, right? Of course, that's not our ultimate aim and objective, but in the very beginning, most of us also came to bhakti under that auspices that, yes, material world is full of suffering, etc., and we need to get out of the material world. In maturation, we start to understand the nature of love and so many other esoteric and deeper things. That's one thing. But most people need a life raft, even now, to just get beyond the overwhelming waves of negative, Kali Yuga influenced and empowered material information that's coming from so many angles. So book distribution wasn't just a novel idea of our previous Acharyas, and our Srila Prabhupada was a continuum of it, our Srila Gurudev was a continuum of it. It was actually part of the mission of Sriman Mahaprabhu. And it was the insightful element in the mission that saw that we will not be able to reach out to so many people. Of course, now it's, as I just mentioned a minute ago, we have more facility to at least get on the same plane because we have access to some media like this, YouTubes and Facebooks and this kind of social media and that kind of social media. Of course, the mass media is pretty much controlled, as is social media, but there are more loopholes in social media, right? But in mass media, to get out the message of Krishna consciousness is very difficult, right? Because it's so controlled and the narratives are so controlled. But especially books still, as well as this kind of media to express what we've understood individually and gleaned from the books is very, very important. So I wanted to bring this up because in speaking to Shriman Bhumipati Babu this morning, I realized how important, actually, not realized now, but maybe it was reiterated in my heart, how important book distribution actually is and how much book distribution is already done to set the platform for giving people even a chance. Because many of those books obviously are still at work to this day. Somebody's child read that book. I'm telling another story. When I first returned from Africa, we were living back in Washington, D.C., and we didn't have any facilities, so we had to rent a small place, and we ultimately ended up renting a small basement apartment. And in that basement apartment, our landlord was a very nice lady, and she had a young son. And they would hear us in the morning, no matter how quiet you try to be in a house that's, relatively small, right? It wasn't a huge house. You'll be able to hear them, the Mangal Arti, chanting. You can hear devotees, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. So, but she was kind enough that was not a big thing for her. I mean, it wasn't the neighbors that were having wild parties or anything. Whatever these spiritual people was doing, it was not super disturbing. And so she was very accommodating to it. And we gave her prasadam. We gave her many books. And here's where the point I'm trying to make comes in. We had given her many books. And how much, Patty read the books or not, I'm not sure. But her young son, right, when we first met him, I don't know, he was 6, 7, 8 years old, something like that. He was young. But he later, somehow or another, and this is way after we've moved out of there, and I didn't even know it, many years later I heard that he actually had obviously read the books, gotten involved. He became a devotee. So this was one of the direct examples in my own experience of where that book, having been planted under one, circumstance, bore its fruit later on in a whole another generation, so to speak, right? And her son, right? Her son was too young at the time, so we were giving her the books. But it bore fruit in him. So how many millions of books have gone out where that may be the case? So we really need to, again, have that emphasis on how important book distribution is. Of course, Srila Prabhupada mentioned now, Srila Guru Padma gave emphasis to this as well, that we can't just distribute the books, however. We have to be embodiments of having been situated ourselves in the understanding and the living of those books. I remember, again, a personal story many years ago before I actually joined the temple, because from a young age, my uncle, who I mentioned before, involved us in yoga and meditation and so many different things. And then eventually he was the one who sent us to the Brooklyn Temple in 1972 or something to get some books for him regarding his own spiritual path. And he shared that with us. And, eventually, anyway, long story short, that's how I started coming to Krishna consciousness. So, but the time spent at that time, like studying the books, reading the books, etc., was very, very important. And I remember having an incident where a friend of mine, well, we didn't go to the same school, but we kind of grew up as contemporaries. And, my life, I was involved in music and so many things at that time. So my life was, relatively successful at that time. So I remember living in this really fancy apartment, and I was, obviously spending money on nonsense things and what have you, fancy stuff and this and that. And he was away at grad school, and he came back, and was it grad school? No, I'm sorry. We were in college at that. This was right in that period somewhere. Anyway, I'm old now. So, but he came to the apartment, and he was saying, oh man, you're doing really well, so forth, so on, this and that. So we started having discussions, and because we were very good friends, and he knew I was involved in Krishna consciousness, he said, yeah, you still involved with your chanting? And I said, yeah, I do my program in the morning, and this and that, and so forth, so on, and what have you. He said, yeah, really good. I've always been wondering, though, if this really means so much to you, and you're really so involved in this, and, every time I hear you speak, man, I feel inspired, and so forth. I don't know if I could follow all these things and so forth, but I wonder, why don't you join and really make this your life? And, actually, it was like an embarrassing moment, but it was like a really poignant moment for me in terms of thinking, you know what? It's not just a matter of being able to speak the thing to other people. It's not just a matter of having it in your repertoire, various, things that you do. Yeah, I'm a musician, I'm a this, I'm a that, and by the way, I'm a spiritualist, of some sort. So he put that on the table. He didn't do it challengingly. It was a genuine curiosity, but it made me think about it, and that which, obviously led to later, deciding, listen, I need to dedicate my life to this. That obviously took different iterations. I ended up having to come back to America and then work again and so forth. But still, it set the foundation, in terms of desire, to then later be able to kind of dedicate my life to bhajan life and to serving, fully the mission of Guru Parapadma, etc., etc. You understand? But these books were everything. Oh, another point about that whole thing was I used to give him books all the time. I would bring books from the temple, give them to him. He would read them, so that's how we'd always end up in these discussions and so forth. But my point here was that living it, understanding it truly, is as important as the book distribution part. Now, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Gurudev emphasized that as well. That we want to both disseminate as much as possible through book distribution and other medium of distributing whatever we've received from Guru Parampara, and we want to ourselves realize something. So it means we have to practice ourselves, etc., etc. So I was just inspired because after talking to Shriman Bhumipati Prabhu this morning, I had the inspiration that yes, in part because we are so overwhelmed by the agents and agency of Kali at this time. There's just so many things going on. And really just either absorption in analyzing it, looking at it, and this and that, that's not really going to help. What's really going to help is to be agents of the spiritual potency that is available in Mahaprabhu's movement, because this is not just Kali Yuga, this is Danya Kali. And Danya Kali means that the highest thing is available because of the appearance of Shri Krishna and then the subsequent appearance of Sriman Mahaprabhu, that the highest thing possible for the jiva is available in this climate of Kali Yuga. And anyone who's received to any degree the mercy of our Guru Varga and our Guru Parampara has the duty, they have the duty, right, to become emissaries of that knowledge, right? Both in persona, means in practice and in your life, and also in terms of being a vehicle for its dissemination, right? Literally distributing books, speaking, whatever. And actually, this is the medicine, right? Because it's literally written in Srimad Bhagavatam that after Krishna disappeared from the world, accompanied by knowledge, religion, etc., how will people get understanding? Then it says, Purnarko Danodita. Oh, from this Srimad Bhagavatam. Right? So Bhagavatam is the basis of everything in the Gaudiya theology, right? Purnarko Danodita, the light of the sun of Srimad Bhagavatam, will be the guiding principle in the darkness of Kali Yuga. Krishna Dhamma Swapogavgate, Krishna Dhamma Swapagate, Dhamma Gyanani Bisaha, in this slok. Kalo Nasta Drishamesha. That in Kali Yuga, the ability to see reality is gone. Darkness is prevailing everywhere. How will people get out of this kind of darkness since Krishna has returned to his own abode? Right? And that all knowledge, real religion, everything is also gone with him. Dharma, Ganadi, Visaha. Everything is also gone with Bhagavan. How will people get any real light? Oh, Purana called Nodita. This Srimad Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna. Tulya Bhagavata Krishna Vibhusavasraya. Right? This Bhagavatam is not different from Krishna. And the person Bhagavat and the book Bhagavat are also equal things. Right? So we have to become like that. We have to become extensions of the personified book Bhagavat in the form of our Guru Vagas. And we have to be the microphone, instrument of our Guru Vagas and make sure we're able to stave off Kali Yuga. Or, because Kali Yuga is its own energy. Sometimes it's not a matter of staving off Kali Yuga, like avoiding it. It's a matter of insulating the many people as we can with the transcendental potency of the shelter of Sriman Mahaprabhu's movement. Right? That may be our contribution. Others have another kind of contribution. But our contribution based on what we received is that. To give people shelter under the merciful teachings of Sriman Mahaprabhu. So we should be both living examples and instruments of dissemination. Jai Hari Hari Bol, Dandavat Pranam, Panchakalpaturubhisha, Kripashindavevacha, Patitanam Pavanevyo, Vaishnavevyo Namo Namaha. Jai Radhe Radhe.